Welcome back to another episode of the Way of BJJ podcast. To support the show, leave us a 5-star review and go check out the Way of BJJ app. And now, let's get to the podcast. All right. Yo, Blair. Now I'm going to put on my podcast fake persona.
There you go.
You know, this is not like me in real life whatsoever. Yeah, because I find that sometimes it's like I would actually call myself an introvert.
Okay.
Right? You know, I don't.
Makes two of us.
Yeah, because it takes so much effort and energy to try to try to show people you're confident or whatever, right? Because
I get that.
I just find that so tiring. So
I've always self-identified as shy for sure. I had a thing. My teeth were super crooked for a super long time, and after I finally got them straightened, I realized like how long I had been going actively trying not to smile, and like how much that had kind of like really forced me to be an introvert.
Right.
And since I straightened them, it's like not that they're perfect now, but they're significantly better. But I think I'm a better teacher for it. For what
they
it's
look
worth.
perfect to me.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir.
That's all that matters.
Thank you, sir.
Well, thank you so much for coming out today. Yeah. So this is the Way of BJJ podcast. So as you know, I always have to make the same disclaimer every single time with my guests. I don't edit because I'm just a lazy fuck. So anything that you say will remain forever on the interweb.
Got it.
Yeah. So if you get canceled, it's on you. I got nothing to do with it.
Fair enough.
All right. Awesome. So so can you just kind of introduce yourself a bit, because you come highly recommended by a lot of people.
That.
And because you just did a guest semi-private lesson for our guys over here,
which was super fun. Great room, a lot of fun.
So and now I know why you came. Highly recommended. That was awesome.
Yeah.
But for people who probably don't know who you are because you're kind of a hidden gem a little bit.
I do a really poor job of like self-promotion and putting myself out there and things like that. I don't do nearly as much as I should, that's for sure. It's a bit like we just said about not having the bandwidth to edit and all that kind of stuff. It's like I find the social media aspect of what we do for a living to be the least interesting part of it for me, and it's so much a part of the actual business model now that I find it very difficult to keep up with. But my name is Blair Turton. I teach in Vancouver, obviously.
BC, not the one in Washington.
Yeah, BC. There you go.
The real one.
Yeah. I'm a black belt in jiu-jitsu under Richie Yip, and it was PTT, but Richie's not with PTT anymore. I'm not actually sure what my standing is with them now. I should probably look into that. I compete less in jiu-jitsu now, but still compete in sports Sambo and combat wrestling, and I try to bring in the most kind of multidisciplinary approach I can to grappling whenever possible. I try to, when people come in, I pitch myself and my school as being a grappling school as opposed to being necessarily a jiu-jitsu school or jiu-jitsu academy. I teach jiu-jitsu for sure. It's still where the bulk of the business is, but I try to bring in as many perspectives from other stuff as I can, for sure. Even with the lesson we did today, so I don't know if you look it up on the app, it'll be on shoulder throws and arm spins, and all of that stuff is within a jiu-jitsu context, but at the same time, it's broadly applicable to a bunch of different grappling arts.
Right. Yeah, that's super awesome. Yeah, because because I think that's a really good kind of a segue into what I do want to talk to you about, because I'm always excited to talk to people that didn't drink the jiu-jitsu Kool-Aid, so to speak.
Yeah, I know what you mean.
Because that's the majority of the people, right? Everybody's going to tell you, oh, jiu-jitsu is the be-all and end-all, and we all know that's not the case, right? So
it's like jiu-jitsu is amazing. Like I don't want to take anything away from it. Like that said, I'm going to go on to talk about all the flaws of jiu-jitsu for an hour, but like
let's do that. Yes.
Yeah.
Let's ruffle some feathers.
Jiu-jitsu is amazing. It was my first love. It's what got me into grappling for sure. And there was a point when I thought it was by far the be all and end all, and everything else kind of paled in comparison. But it's a bit like, I don't know, if you were like, man, spaghetti and meatballs. Spaghetti and meatballs is the food. You have to have spaghetti. This is the best food ever. And someone was like, have you ever had a meatball sub? And you were like, what is that? And you're like, well, it's meatballs and carbs. And you're like, no, spaghetti and meatballs. And you're like, yeah, but meatball subs are amazing. They're much more portable. It's kind of like that. Okay, well, let me go back a little bit and talk about how I got into kind of branching out in that regard.
Sure. Let's go.
So
Oh, you know what? Before
sorry, yeah.
before we get to that story,
Sure.
Because another thing about the podcast is like I've done like how many 41 episodes right now?
I think so, yeah.
Right, 41 episodes so far, and we're still like trying to find our voice and trying to find
Sure.
what people would be interested about and stuff, and what we can do differently. I mean, I interview people for sure,
Right.
But now I think because we have this new app that just came out, and a bulk of our business for sustaining this podcast is we do have to make money,
Right.
from somewhere. And what I'm thinking the app is what we are really trying to push out there right now.
Sure.
So one of the difficulties right now for us is to get people to understand why is our app, the way of BJJ app, like different than other stuff out there, and
Right.
what type of problems are we trying to solve? Because ultimately, I do need to provide an incentive, a solution out there to get people interested to actually want to check it out, right?
Yeah.
So because you knew nothing about the app when you first came here, right? Correct? Today?
Very peripherally aware of it. I think I saw it when it first, very first debuted. I remember one of my coworkers at the time, Migo, who was on the podcast, I believe.
Yeah, Migo, yeah.
He kind of showed it to me, and I glanced through it, but it looks improved since then.
Oh yeah. It's very much improved for sure. So for somebody like you who had like kind of a little bit of inkling of what it might be about, and after I kind of briefly showed it to you, I spent about 10 minutes just kind of gone through everything with you today.
Yeah.
Right? So what are your first impressions?
I thought me to need that probably most people are trying to kind of meet on their own already. I literally have a things to practice playlist on YouTube. So, a big part of the app is that you're going to import that and be able to timestamp it and link it through to like kind of a mind mappy type of thing of what your game is. I think it's going to be strongest for certain types of, I don't want to say learners, but like more visual people. Like there's certain people that are going to really benefit from that style of mapping, right? And then there's other people who are going to kind of struggle with that style of mapping. But I think more and more I've seen a lot of people really drawn to that type of thing, that are trying to make flowcharts and trying to do those kind of things on their own.
So without me putting words in your mouth, if somebody who has never seen the app before asks you, "Oh, Blair, you just saw that app, right?
Right.
Or what exactly is it?" How would you describe it to somebody who has never seen it?
I would say that it is a visual interface for a technique library, so that you can kind of map out both what you want to learn, but also what you are actually actively invested in making a part of your kind of core skill set, and being able to make that as kind of user friendly as possible would be kind of what I took from it.
Okay, cool.
Yeah.
Nice.
I thought, I really did think it was good. I wouldn't blow smoke up your ass about it. I think.
You feel free to.
No. I mean,
it strokes my ego.
I think anybody who's in this life for a period of time is going to experiment with different modalities for how they're going to do it. Some people like a physical journal, and some people, think that the act of actually writing helps them to remember things. Some people just want to have a record of it. Some people like to track. I got a friend who I don't know if it's still true, but like he was a brown belt who could list every time he had tapped, which was not that many, because he's a very large guy, and he was quite good at jiu-jitsu. But at the same time, I was like, I don't know how you mentally keep track of all that kind of stuff. But some people are just record keepers, right?
And I think he's wasting his talents. Keeping track of how many times he taps. He could have been like somebody.
Yeah, I don't know, man. It's or he's not tapping enough. But either way, it's there's certain people that are record keepers, and there's certain people that are they're gonna want to be able to keep the most kind of in-depth version of that. And again, especially, we all kind of go through a phase where it's like you just can't stop thinking about grappling. Like especially when you first start, it's like I can't train 10 hours a day, but I'm thinking about it 10 hours a day, and to have a way to do that efficiently, and to have a way to do that would be super helpful.
Cool.
Have you ever done Duolingo?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
So one feature that Duolingo has that I actually really liked is when you start, say you do like a module at the start, and then you pass it. and then you go on. Every once in a while, it'll pop up and be like, hey, it's been 3 weeks since you looked at this. Maybe do a refresher on it. You know what I mean? And I always thought that was actually a really good feature. And I thought that as far as if you're ever looking to add things to the app, I thought something like that would be really good to just be like, hey, like, you haven't practiced your arm bars from the back in a couple of weeks. You should do a couple of those.
For sure, because what you just said is 100% true, right? Like as somebody who's been immersed in jiu-jitsu for a while, when you see it demonstrated, the app, you can immediately figure out, oh, I could use it for this and this and this, and you get excited about it, right? So one of the issues that we are having right now is how to effectively communicate that to people, because people have short attention span, right?
Yeah,
because if I can sit down with every single person and just go through the demo like what we did, then would it be easy? But now I have to grab their attention on social media within like 30 seconds.
Right.
And so that's why I'm also talking to guests about it. Like
I get that.
For you, as somebody who's been into grappling for such a long time, who also teaches, who's also coaches, right? Your perspective would be different than somebody who's a beginner, for sure.
Yeah.
But as somebody in your position right now, right? What excites you the most about seeing something like that?
The being able to timestamp and import things from YouTube so that I could make that process quicker and easier for me. Because again, there's a million times when I will see something or I'll bookmark something or from my perspective, I'm more looking at lesson planning than I am, my own kind of growth. Because like as you get to a certain point as an instructor, you spend more of your time working on other people's games than you do your own.
Right.
But as I'm planning my classes and stuff, I like to try to have competition examples of things. So for example, if I was doing like the arm spin, if I was doing this lesson on arm spins, I find it really helpful to be like, okay, everybody gather around. Here's 3 arm spins in competition, just so you guys know I'm not making this shit up. And have a means to be able to access that stuff quickly, not just as a one-off, but keep a good log of it that I could, if I'm halfway through the arm spin class and somebody asks a question about a class from 3 weeks ago, that I can quickly navigate back to that and pull it back up, would be kind of what would be most helpful for me. Because like everybody else, I live in my phone way too much, and once my phone comes out in a lesson, even if it's for the best intentions, things get derailed really quickly. So if I have a way to try to keep that on track, I think that would be best for me. But again, that's from a slightly different perspective, right? I might not be the end user that you guys necessarily had in mind, right? If you're talking about trying to get people from blue to purple belt, that's going to be a little bit different than somebody who's been training for 16 or 17 years and who's running the class, so
for sure. Yeah. So I don't want to make the podcast all about talking about the app. So I'm gonna wrap this portion up of it pretty quickly. But if people are interested in checking out the what the app is about, because again, we're still trying to find the best way to communicate that. But if you're interested in checking it out, go to you can go to Apple App Store, you can go to Google Play Store, search for Whale BJJ app. You can download it because we actually have a bunch of free stuff in there to kind of showcase exactly what it could look like when you create your own flowcharts and sequences or graphs, as we call it, right? And Blair's stuff will be in there as well, so you can kind of see how he breaks down a lesson. So go ahead and do that. Yeah, it's gonna be awesome.
Yeah.
So. Or maybe it will actually keep users away. They'll be, oh, what is this bullshit?
Yeah, exactly.
No, well, thanks for spending time to give me.
No worries.
Give me some
no worries. Honestly, I do think it's a decent product. I think, again, it depends on what you train like. But if you're somebody who's a record keeper, it's gonna be phenomenal.
But what if I told you everything you create and lesson plan and everything, you can directly share that with your students?
That would be massively helpful as well. I used to write this blog, which. I'm glad I did it because it's to my mind good content, and I can go into it and find it and send it to students as I need to. But like for a long time, I would teach in every class I taught. I would do a write up with like GIFs of it. GIFs, which do you say? Now this is going to get me canceled.
I know.
I say GIFs. So like it was all in there, and it was how I chose to disseminate the information after the fact. So if somebody missed a class or they wanted to recap a class, then I would just say, yeah, it's on the blog, go search for De La Hiva or whatever it is. But that seems like probably a better interface because blogs are dead. So, yeah. So
nice. Yeah, well, then let's bring the conversation back to you right now. So what is your favorite way of, I guess, note-taking or keeping track of what you've learned? Because I think a lot of people have that issue.
I've kind of done it all. I've tried the physical book at one point. Again, I've got a million YouTube playlists saved and stuff like that. Everybody's got a bunch of favorited stuff on Instagram and all that kind of stuff. Instagram is taking over more and more as far as my attention span is shrinking and shrinking, and it just kind of fits. I'm sure there's no correlation there whatsoever, but
whatever they're trying to do, that's succeeding.
yeah, they've colonized my head, that's for sure. But yeah, I still really like long form stuff. Every once in a while I'll sit and try to write something out, but it's I don't know. Have you ever tried to articulate grappling like written, like in words?
Yes,
it's
yes.
very difficult.
Yeah.
Trying to keep track of like who's left, my left, their left, who's on top, that kind of stuff. Which player, if there's a sweep, do I now refer to that person as the bottom player, or should I go back and remake it and just have use names the whole time to make it clear? Whatever. It can be quite challenging to do, but I enjoy it. I find that it does increase my understanding of it to try to write something through. If you try to write out a berimbolo in just verbal steps, it's a task for sure.
Yeah, how would I even go about it? Because you did mention technology is it's kind of making us really becoming shittier and shittier at doing certain things. Because right now, as soon as you said that, I'm like, hey, I would just ask ChatGPT to see what you.
There you go. There you go. Yeah, that'd be a fun experiment actually to see if what it came out with and whether or not you could actually learn from it. But the reality is, like, I made a comment to one of your students that teaching is a funny thing because you have to you say all these things, you're just throwing stuff at a wall and you don't know what's going to stick for an individual student, right? And some people are visual learners, some people definitely learn better reading things. Like I know some people that still really love jiu-jitsu books, like the old ones with just the step-by-step photos, like the old Glenn Cordoza stuff, like all that, like
Master the rubber guard.
Yeah, all that kind of stuff, or so I want to try to, for my students, I want to have an option to kind of do both. You want to watch a YouTube video, that's fine. You want to read an article, that's fine. But I do think that the app would probably work well for that, for sure.
Yeah, and because another thing that, let's be realistic too, right? Like you could be like saving those YouTube playlists and whatnot and writing journals or whatever. How often do you go back to them?
Well, that's a big problem. Yeah, I don't. It's a reality. I think that if I save it in my phone, that it's saved in my head, and it's not. And again, that's a good argument for trying to write things down, is they do say that when you write something down, it changes where it's stored in your brain. Now I don't know how far that goes as to what.
Yeah, is this scientifically proven? Is it the act of actually having pen to paper?
That's what I had heard.
Some type of feedback. That's
what I had heard, and it's the same as like
can you write on a tablet and achieve the same result, or is that different?
Yeah, that's what I mean. I don't actually know how far that extends or not, but I think it's kind of the same thing as they say that if you meet somebody and you repeat their name within the first couple of seconds of meeting them, you're more likely to remember it because it changes.
Unless you keep calling Bruce Glenn.
Unless you keep calling Bruce Glenn. Apologies to Bruce Glenn. They're the same name in my head. I'm like, that's the same thing. Yeah.
Nice. Yeah. So
there's like 4 people in the room, and I can't get the name straight.
Now let's go back to the to what you said earlier, that jiu-jitsu was your first love, right?
Yeah. So I started in jiu-jitsu. I started with Fabio Holanda in Montreal. I got my blue belt there.
Were you originally from Montreal?
No, I'm from Windsor, Ontario originally, but then I went to school in Montreal. I went to Concordia, and my neighbor trained at Brazilian top team, so he convinced me to come out and give it a shot.
Nice.
It was cool. It was an interesting way to start. The first tournament, we had a little in-house tournament, and at that tournament, because Pat Cote trained at the club at the time, and he announced his fight with Anderson for the title, like at this tournament, and I was like, man, I'm really in it. This is really
Patrick
cool.
Cote, former UFC fighter.
Yep.
Who was kind of the pride of Canada back in the days.
Yeah, he was. He kind of like. Him and GSP were on a really similar trajectory for a little while, and then George kept going, and Pat ran into Anderson.
Yeah.
But it was a cool environment to come up in. I learned a lot really quickly under his system. It was very hands off. It's very different than the way that I teach now. Fabio Holanda did not do a ton of one-on-one work with the white belts. He did the senior white belts, and the blue belts did a lot of the work with the white belts, and then once you got into the advanced class, then you got a lot of attention from Fabio. But under his system, I learned a ton really, really fast. I think I was a blue belt for 10 months maybe. I think I was a white belt for 10 months before I got my blue belt.
Okay. Well, I can see all the keyboard warriors, right? No, that's way too short of time
you
frame
go.
to get a blue belt.
Yeah, it is. It is what it is.
I mean, if your professor thinks you're ready, you're ready. You know.
Yeah, well, that's it.
That's the truth.
Well,
yeah.
that's it. And Fabio's pretty. He's been in it for a long time. You know what I mean? So
Yeah, especially somebody who's
Yeah.
who's highly reputable like that. You know.
yeah.
So,
And then I moved. And then the financial crisis hit in 2008, and I left Montreal and moved out here.
what made you think he's going to be better over here?
Well, I have, my brother lived out here, and a bunch of my friends lived out here, and they said it was better. And somehow I was like, oh yeah, I'll move. I just needed to get out of Montreal. I had a not amazing relationship with Montreal. It's a great city, but I had a lot of personal issues that I projected onto the city, and we're like, well, it's Montreal keeping me down. When in reality, it was like, you just got to get your shit together. But it is what it is.
Oh man, I mean that's probably the toughest lesson to learn, eh?
Yeah, well, fingers crossed, I'll learn it any day now. Yeah, so then I came out here and I started training with Richie and
Infighting, right?
infighting, yeah, with Richie, yep. And it was good. I learned a ton under Richie, and I progressed really well under Rich. And then while I was training with him, I had a really bad habit of I would post my foot on the mat, and my pinky toes would pop off to the side and dislocate. And I'd have to fix them and I'd tape them, and it'd be super annoying. And it just got to be that if I didn't tape them every like the second I walked in the door, I would break my toe again. So I was looking for answers online, and I searched for remember those grapple socks were a thing for a little while. Like people were trying to wear those things.
Ninja, everybody's like ninja socks.
And I was like, I can't wear those. And then somebody said, get some Sambo shoes. So I bought a pair, and if you're unfamiliar with Sambo shoes, they are like basically a leather sock. Like these are stells. They're it's gi material on the upper, and then everything else is suede. So you can take it off. You can ball it up in your hand. There's no structure to it, but it does keep your toes a lot more compact.
Kind of ballet shoes.
Pardon me?
Kind of those ballerinas.
Yes, I don't know. I've never actually. I don't think I've ever held a ballet shoe, but yeah, like there's nothing to them. You can ball them up completely. They're just basically a lace-up sock.
Yeah. What about wrestling shoes? Are they similar or different?
Wrestling shoes have like a hard sole. They've got like a rubber sole on them, right? So they're closer to almost like a running shoe, right?
So you would piss
or like
off
certainly like a boxing.
So you would
shoe.
piss off your training partners.
I wouldn't want to like I have wrestling shoes. I'll wear them if I know I'm doing like a pure wrestling practice. I'd be fine to wear them. But if I'm doing any type of submissions or taking the back or anything like that, I don't want to be slamming like a big rubber sole onto somebody's head. Right. It seems problematic to me. But Sambo shoes, I don't care. They're fine. They don't bother me whatsoever. Mm-hmm. So I started wearing these things mainly to protect my feet, and then was like, well, if I'm going to wear them, I should do a little research and find out what Sambo is. So I started doing that, and then obviously kind of got familiar with the rule set a little bit, just through some online stuff. Found Riley Bodycomb's, a lot of his videos, because he was kind of one of the main people doing Sambo stuff in English. Mm-hmm. And around that time, this was probably purple. Richie started making grumblings about promoting me to brown, and I had like a lot of imposter syndrome around the idea of getting promoted to brown belt at that time. And one of the biggest things for me was, I was like, well, like you said, when your instructor thinks you're ready, right? So I was like, well, if he gives me a brown belt, I'm not going to take it off. So I better try to meet the challenge, right? Mm-hmm. I better try to figure out, well,
that's probably why they do that anyways.
Well, it depends,
to force you to grow.
Yeah, sometimes. I mean, like to be honest, there's certain students you hold them back a little, not sandbag them, because if they're competing, it's different. But if you're like, this person's pretty good, but I think what they need for their development is to actually like be taken down a notch, you might kind of hold them back, like not for long, but just, kind of slow your roll a little bit. Whereas other people, you're like, you're never going to think you're good enough. So I need to get you there by forcing it on you to a certain extent. And that's kind of what he did with me. But anyway, my thought at the time was, okay, well, if I'm uncomfortable with a brown belt, what is it about my grappling that feels the most uncomfortable, right? And it was my standing wrestling. I was like, I don't have any stand up, so I need to put some serious time into that. So then I really doubled down on it and started to try to find people that I could train with to do good quality stand up. And Riley was one of the biggest in that, and then Vlad Kulikov as well, because they're the two certainly, and Steve Cope for English language Sambo in like North America, like at the time, those were like the only people out there, right? So I'd be scouring YouTube and all that kind of stuff and trying to find these videos, and then was lucky enough Riley was doing a seminar down in Portland, so I went down to train with him and got along well with him, and got a chance to see him train again a couple of times, and then he was bringing a team to go compete in the Netherlands and shot me a message and said, hey, we're going if you want to go. So I went with them and did okay in the tournament. I ended up second in the first one. And then it was all kind of off and running from that. And the nature of jiu-jitsu is like you don't even need to be that good at it. You just need to like standing wrestling to get a reputation as being like the guy who's into standing wrestling. You know what I mean? So like,
wait, this guy doesn't pull guard? Oh,
yeah, exactly. So like, you know, as you said at the start, like not a lot of people even in Vancouver know who I am or like where my club is, but the people who do will usually say something about like, oh, they stand a lot there or something like that. Because I really do try to emphasize like the broadest lens of grappling possible, and trying to, you know, engage in different rule sets and engage in different things to so that you can be like, yeah, I like meatballs. Like, what else can I have meatballs in? It doesn't have to just be pasta.
You really love
know
meatballs, don't you?
I love a meatball sub. I do really love a meatball sub. Yeah, so, you know, and then that kind of branched out from doing some Sambo competitions to, you know, I found out about combat wrestling and then started trying to get into that and harassed Matt Kaiser on the island to make sure that I would get a chance to do that. And because he was Combat Wrestling Canada at the time, and it's grown a little bit since then. And the combat wrestling is even cooler. For my money, combat wrestling is like the most entertaining spectator sport of the grappling disciplines. Okay. Like it's the rule set for combat wrestling.
Yeah. Tell me about it because I'm not familiar with it at all.
Okay, so combat wrestling is no-gi, first off. You wear shoes. You can wear Sambo shoes or wrestling shoes. It allows chokes, arm locks, leg locks. No twisting leg locks, so you're not allowed heel hooks, but you are allowed to reap and you are allowed toe holds and you are allowed knee bars. It scores 1 to 4 points for quality of throw based on how a person hits the mat. So if they hit their mat on their butt and stay, that's 1 point. If they hit their mat on their flank, it's 2 points. If they hit the flat of their back, then it's 4 points. Or any throw that lifts them over the height of your hip and lands in a valid scoring position will be 4 points regardless of how they land, as long as they don't land on like their elbows and knees or something like that.
Right.
As far as how much ground time is allowed, it is as long as there's action. So if you take a person down and you are aggressively passing guard and aggressively attacking, you are going to be able to stay there for as long as you want. If at any point it stalls and nothing is happening, they will separate you and stand you back up. Or if at any point the top player wants to back up and motion the other person back up, then they will return to standing.
Mm-hmm. Does that include like if you're in mount, you're kind of holding mount, you're not really...
Yeah, if you're a mount, you got to work. You get 1 point for mount, 1 point for back. And you get pin points as well. So you can earn up to 4 points for pins. Pins are chest-to-chest contact past the guard with the person's back on the mat. Okay. And it's up to, I think a 4-point pin is 30 seconds. I'd have to double check. But you can score up to 4 points for, there's a 2-point pin and a 4-point pin, and you can only score 4 points from pinning in a match. So you can either get two 2 points or 1 4-point. But as a result, it is like, it's just really exciting because you get like all the benefit of standing wrestling, and the points incentivize people to stand and wrestle.
And you can submit, right?
And you can submit, right? but there's a viable path to submission, right? But it also, your guard has to be like aggressive and it has to be combative, right? You can't just sit down and expect the other person to come to you. If I want to pull guard, I'm allowed to pull guard, but I need to maintain a connection between us and I need to be working, right? I can't sit down and then allow you to back up because you'll just motion me back up. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. Whereas like, and to me, I think that's how it should be. Like if I pull guard, I should be connected to you and I should be threatening you. Like I shouldn't be, you know, depending on the referee to keep me in this match.
Yeah, that's very interesting, eh? So where is the combat portion of it? Because when you say combat wrestling, I thought there's going to be like striking or slapping or something.
Yeah, exactly. That's the problem, right? So combat Sambo has striking, combat jiu-jitsu has the slapping, combat wrestling, it started in Japan. It was named in Japan. It's kind of the outlier to the convention. It should probably be called something else. To be honest, it's kind of lost that war at this point. Mm-hmm. It should ditch it. But I think it's just, you know, wrestling as in freestyle wrestling with submissions is kind of more what they're looking at as far as naming it goes. But yeah, I really do think it's good. And the biggest thing, one of the biggest things for me is that throws score on impact, right? So for both combat wrestling and Sambo, scores throw on impact, whereas Jiu-jitsu, they don't, right? Jiu-jitsu, they score on cover. So if you take somebody down and they bounce right back up and you don't hold them down for 3 seconds, you don't get any points for that. You might get an advantage, but you don't get any points for it. Whereas in Sambo and combat wrestling, as soon as they hit the ground, you get your points, right? So it incentivizes, I'll put it this way, you could be a freestyle wrestler and enter a combat wrestling tournament and have a clear path to victory, because there is also a tech fall, right? So if you can get, I think it's a 12-point lead, then you can walk off the mat, right? So you have a clear path to win just by wrestling. Or you could be like somebody who has no standing wrestling and is just a submission artist and go in and have a path to victory. So you get really interesting matchups in that regard. You remember a couple of years ago there was a match between, I think it was Bo Nickel and Gordon Ryan?
Yes, as a modified rules or something.
It was ridiculous. Yeah. It was so stupid. They set it up in a way where it was guaranteed to be boring, right? Because Gordon knew he couldn't score wrestling points on Bo.
Right.
But the rules said that Gordon, I believe the rules said Gordon was not allowed to pull guard, but that if he got taken down, he was allowed to stay down, and Bo had to engage him. Right. So that means if you're Bo Nickel, you have this rule set where it's like, okay, it's a 10-minute match or whatever. The only possible path for me to win is to go 9 minutes and 57 seconds of just pushing this guy around, score 1 takedown, and have the time run out before he can submit me. Yeah. That's your only path to victory. And that's terrible. That's inherently boring, right? And that's basically what happened. The only thing was Gordon turned his back to him with like 30 seconds left, and he got suplexed. Yeah. But then Bo had to engage with him and he got triangled, right? And it's like, if they had done that match under combat wrestling rules, it would have been super interesting, because then it's like, well, how good is this guard? Can he hold him down after he gets taken down? Can Bo disengage? Can he get the tech fall? It would have been a really interesting match, and I would love to see more of those kind of things.
But then it wouldn't have happened.
No. Right? Yeah. Well, no, to Gordon's credit, I think he redid it under wrestling rules afterwards, and he got gooned, if I recall.
Right. But, because I remember hearing something about, like, even up until like an hour before the match or whatever, we're still like, trying to agree on the rules and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah. I'm not a big fan of Gordon, but I think at that time he was still in the process of carving out his kind of mystique in a way that he doesn't have to worry about it now. So I think by the time they even got around to doing the rematch, he was a little less sensitive of what it was going to look like if he lost, kind of thing. But
I can't imagine the type of pressure he's feeling day in and day out, man.
I mean, again, like I don't know the guy. I'm not gonna make any disparaging, comments about him.
Do it for viewership.
Do it for the views. No, I mean, but I do think, like, I know I have a lot of students, for example, that used to love him that don't now, and they've said that he's too picky in his fights and he avoids fights and this and that. And I'm like, well, look, when you're that good, you can dictate the terms. But that's a kind of a problem with the sport, is like, you don't see that in other sports, that the champion just gets to dictate the terms in the same way. Boxing maybe a little bit, but like you wouldn't see it in any like other kind of, like, it's not like the Kansas City Chiefs get to say like, well, we won the Super Bowl, so next year we're going to set the rules of the league. You'd be like, what the fuck? That's nonsense. You know what I mean?
But they also get paid a ridiculous amount of money.
They get paid a lot of money.
To not say no to anything.
Yeah, and it's different, right? And again, there's a unifying body of rules and all that kind of stuff. We don't really have that. We've got the IBJJF, which has a lot of problems. We've got.
I'm not a fan whatsoever.
No, I don't like the rule. Again, Part of the reason I haven't competed in jiu-jitsu in quite a while is because I don't particularly like the rules.
Right, yeah, because that's what I'm going to ask you. That's the follow-up question, right? Because you initially went down this Sambo/wrestling path because you wanted to make your jiu-jitsu better, because jiu-jitsu was still your primary thing. But then it sounds like then the Sambo and the combat wrestling actually took over now.
Yeah, well, I mean, kind of. I mean, again, like the bulk of what I do on a day-to-day basis is still jiu-jitsu. But like the jiu-jitsu in my club is again, we start standing a lot and all that kind of stuff. But as far as competing goes, it doesn't play to my strengths anymore at all. Again, it's become so leg lock heavy that again, I've got bad knees. I had an ACL replacement on my right knee, and I need one on my left knee. I tore that a while ago. So getting caught in deep water in an intense heel hook fight is not super fun for me anymore. When leg locks were first starting to get popular, again, because I was really into Riley stuff, I was on that train early, and really
was known for that shit back then.
I was really into it, and I did a private with Eddie Cummings when I went to New York. Nice. Years ago. It was right before he had the match with Riley, and it was right before that was kind of like
he
was really
fucking destroy, right?
It was really quick. Yeah, it was really quick, and like it's funny because like.
And you train with both guys, right? So
yeah, I mean, it was like I was I have a lot of respect for both of them, and they at least at the time had a lot of respect for each other. I know Riley still has a ton of respect for Eddie, and Eddie had some really nice things to say when I did the private with him about like most of where we started from was from his work. You know what I mean? So it was. But anyway, that's all shifted so much now, and it's become such a specialization, and it just doesn't play to my strengths. It's not, I don't find it, not that viewership matters, like I don't wrestle to be watched wrestling, but at the same time, like my kind of smell test is like, if you and I were having a grappling match right now, we should be able to pull somebody in off the street and just say, hey, what are they doing? And if they don't say fighting, then something's wrong. You know what I mean? If they're like, I don't know what that's supposed to be, then it doesn't look.
That looks scary as shit.
It looks like, I don't know, like I can't tell what they're trying to do. They're like, it's the leg entanglement stuff it just kind of doesn't pass the smell test for me anymore. Which is not to say you shouldn't know it. Obviously, you have to know it. You need, especially a minimum effective dose to be able to defend it. But as far as how I want to engage in it, like, I mean, we had a round. I'm happy to go for a try a knee bar at the end or whatever, especially depending on the circumstance. But like, I don't want to be inverting from the bottom to try to get into
that's
saddle
actually
or whatever.
why watching some of the elite guys compete now is actually fun again, because they kind of negate each other's leg locks attacks now, right?
Yeah, we're seeing a rise of wrestling. We're seeing it, especially
which is fun.
Especially with ADCC. ADCC is a weird example. Okay, talk about again outlier opinion. ADCC for my money is the worst rules. They're terrible. I don't understand them at all for a variety of reasons.
Right.
First off, like one of my big pet peeves in sports is when you change the rules halfway through something. So the idea of saying we're going to have a no time limit, or we're going to have a no points period and then a points period, doesn't make sense to me. Just have the rules be the rules and let the behaviors be the behaviors. But the idea that like the correct behavior through half of the match is going to be different than the correct behavior through the second half of the match just drives me insane. I hate that they changed the
in the finals, right?
they changed the lengths. They double it. That's wild. Like imagine you're like, okay, I play for the Canucks and we've gone through however many rounds of the playoffs. We made it to the final, and now I got to play 5 periods instead of 3. You'd be like, well, the game I have to play is so different than it was to get here. And I think you should allow people to do what they did to get there in the final instead of suddenly you need a different skill set. That's crazy to me. GSP took a lot of heat towards the end of his career for being, quote, boring, right? And he commented on it once and said exactly that. He was like, if you guys want me to be exciting again, let me fight 3-round fights. But the fight I have to fight to go 5 rounds is inherently different than it's going to be to go 3 rounds. And it just doesn't make sense to me to change the rules halfway through.
Yeah. Furthermore, in the finals, if you pull guard in the first half, you get a -1, and which doesn't happen in the previous matches.
Yeah, exactly. Again, like let people do what whatever. Like take the person you brought to the dance or whatever. Like,
so this is what I'm going to say. Mo Jessom, the organizer of ADCC. I know you watch and listen to my podcast for sure. I know. I actually don't know. But
I'm sure. I'm sure.
Hopefully you do.
You never know. Maybe you'll find it. Well, I saw a clip of him the other day.
If somebody is listening to this, send this clip to him. Like, fuck, come on, man. Come on.
Well, I saw a clip of him the other day. And he was talking about it, and he said that, like, almost with pride, like the ADCC rules are the hardest to score on. They are notoriously difficult to score. And that's another issue to me that I'm like, I think it just doesn't make sense. Again, I definitely prefer throws to score on impact. I really dislike how hard it is to get a point on the board in ADCC. But we're seeing this weird, almost subset of wrestling as a result of it that is becoming its own unique little style, right? Where, like, last ADCC, I didn't watch that much of it because, again, I find it boring, to be totally honest. The highlights are great. I love that. Like, it's the best tournament in the world because we all agree it's the best tournament in the world, and because the quality of the grapplers is the best tournament in the world. It's not the best tournament in the world because of the way it's organized or the way that the rules are set up. I think all those same people and all that same hype applied to a different rule set would be significantly more entertaining to me. Where was I going with this? I've lost it. So we saw all this double collar tie stuff. That's what I was going to talk about.
Okay.
Because the first half has no points.
Right.
we're seeing this new brand of wrestling, which is almost exclusively about trying to tire your opponent out as much as possible for when you can score a point. Because there's no incentive to actually try anything significant in the first half, so people don't do it. So all they're trying to do is get to the point where they're allowed to score a point with more energy than the other person. So like a double collar tie, like a tie clinch, is not really a wrestling thing. Like you don't typically see that in many things. It's not a very offensive position. You can put a lot of weight on a person, especially when they're really upright, but you can't really attack that much from there. The foot sweeps are really the only thing. So that's basically like most of what we saw is like a ton of double collar tie, a ton of foot sweep attempts, because they're just like, I'm going to be as conservative as possible, try to be as heavy as possible till I get to the point where I'll be rewarded for my efforts, and then I'll actually try to win the fight. And that's silly to me. I think it makes way more sense to be like, just try to win the fight right off the bat.
Right.
Or have a rule set that encourages people to win the fight.
Yeah, so it's either going to be that, or it's going to be like the younger guys now when they do the tons of outside passing, right? They try to tire you out.
Yep.
You know, they so basically throughout like the entire, let's say if it's a 6-minute match, you know, they try to tire you out in the first 3 minutes as much as possible by just flanking left and right, ducking unders and run into north and south, force you to regard. And then in the second half, when you're tired, then they somehow pass your guard and score, right?
Yeah. And again, you can't tell them they're wrong. It's the right system for the rules. I just don't think that the rules are what I would personally like to watch that much.
Yeah, so do you, because it sounds like you said the reason why it's so popular is because we all agree that it's
I mean, you hear all the time it's the Olympics of grappling, right? Which is kind of insulting to wrestling to me, but, because it's in the Olympics. But, of submission grappling, it's the biggest tournament in the world. They make a point of pride of saying it's not a jiu-jitsu tournament, it's a submission wrestling tournament, and therefore it has different rules and all that kind of stuff. I don't think they're super easy to understand, which I think is a bit of a hindrance to viewership. But at the same time, I guess maybe take it back. You got to ask yourself, like, what are we doing here? Like, what is the purpose of this? What are we trying to do? Are we trying to make a viewer-friendly sport? Is it about viewership?
Right.
Is it about combativeness? Because if it's about combativeness, the no points period doesn't make any sense whatsoever. Are we trying to figure out who's the best? What is the main purpose for existing? You know what I mean? And it feels convoluted in that regard to me. The whole no points thing to me is just whether it's submission only tournaments in general or the no points period in ADCC, feels like it's kind of like I don't want to say a failed experiment, because I think the results are in, and as long as the results are in, no experiments failed. You get data and that's it.
Right.
But the results are in on that, and it wasn't the hypothesis they started with was not what they got. Right. My understanding was that it was like, we don't like points because points, people play for points, they don't play for submissions. So we're going to try to get rid of it, and we're going to free it up and let everybody be really more combative. And there's going to be so many more submissions, it's going to be great. But what we see a lot is that when somebody's not worried about giving up points, they can play very defensively against submissions by giving up position in a way that has, I believe, brought the submission rate down and is certainly less combative. And as a result, it ends up being, to me, less viewer friendly. I'd rather watch a points competition personally. Yeah. And I actually think it would be even better if we added a tech fall to it. So even if IBJJF had a tech fall, you'll see more submissions. You know what I mean? If you know that you're going to lose this match, say it's a 10-point tech fall, and you're down 8, and I'm doing a thing that's going to give me those 2. You're going to go crazy because you're about to lose, and we get more submissions out of that,
right.
Which is exactly what tends to happen in Sambo. A lot of submissions you see in Sambo are people behaving in a way where they know that they're about to get tech fall. They're in a pin, and they know that if that clock reaches 20 more seconds, I'm gonna be done, right? So then they bridge, they do things in a way that they give up an arm and they get armbarred, and it ends up being, to me, more exciting. But maybe not for everybody. Yeah, I know a lot of people that love submission.
No. Yeah, I mean, I hear that because because I was thinking back to my style of rolling, right? I'm kind of like that, because again, I'm trying to stay safe. I don't want to get hurt, so I'm playing real defensive. I wouldn't fucking pay to watch myself grapple somebody.
Well, that's it. And that's kind of my point, right? It's like, well, what are we doing here, right? And then again, to go back, like the points, some of this is citation needed kind of stuff, right? my understanding of the points in jiu-jitsu is that they're supposed to emulate positions that you could effectively strike from. Right. So the idea is, if I pass your guard, I could strike you better. If I go to mount, I could strike you better. So we give points for these things because it was like, we want to learn to fight, but we don't want to get hit. So we made up this system of points to simulate what it would be like to be in a real fight. Right. And then we're like, well, there's not enough submissions, so we're going to get rid of those. And now it's like, well, there's not, now people are playing too defensive, so we need to bring something in. So I know, we'll let them slap each other. And now we're back to the start where it's like, well, the whole point was that we wanted to not get hit doing this. So we came up with points, but then we caused this weird circle where now we're suddenly back to getting hit because there wasn't enough submissions. And we think that's going to be the thing that's going to fix it. It's strange to me. It's like, it's like the Cobra paradox.
Right. Because you're describing the IBJJF rule sets in the beginning, right? When they had the points and everything.
Right.
And then the thesis is that because the person who's down points is gonna try to somehow win at the end, and then they would open up.
They don't.
Then the other person would be able to get a submission, right? But
they don't.
But that's not what happens, right?
No, because the other thing is like, and again, like I'm paraphrasing a lot of my coaches on this stuff. But one of the biggest gripes, and one of the things I tell my students all the time, is that you can't lose twice, right? And losing is losing. But within the jiu-jitsu community, losing isn't really losing, right? If I say, yeah, well, he beat me on points, but he didn't submit me.
It was just an advantage,
it's like,
man.
It's a thing where it's like, I lost, but I didn't really lose. And it's like, no, you lost. Like, let's just call it what it is. You lost, right? You didn't win. That's for sure. So what difference does it make if you got submitted or if you lost on points, right? To me, I'm like, well, if you lost on points, then maybe you should have been doing something a little crazy to try to get the win, and you get caught in a submission. In a weird way, there's almost like, I'd almost rather see students get submitted because I know they're working, rather than being like, well, I was on the bottom and it was 20-0 and I never tried to do anything.
Yeah, I know. From a student perspective, that might make sense, but I'm going to be the devil's advocate here, right? But if you are kind of a famous guy, right, who has a reputation, you don't want to be on somebody else's highlight reel, right?
I get that. Yeah. I get that. Yeah, and again, like in a sport, that the primary income comes from selling your expertise, then your win-loss record is directly related to your income, and that's a different thing. You know what I mean? So it's not like that. Like I've heard Russian wrestlers talk about American wrestlers and how you can't trust their record because they'll fight anybody. Right, because they do in the States, they do all these weird matches. They'll do these beat the streets things and like, hey, we're putting a barge out in the middle of the Hudson and we're gonna have a couple of wrestling matches on it, and you'll get good guys that go on these cards and they take a loss, and nobody thinks that they're terrible because they took a loss on it. Whereas my understanding is that the Russian wrestlers are a little bit more protective of their records on that kind of stuff. But I think their income is a little bit different as a result of. I'm sure a variety of factors. But yeah, I mean, if you're selling instructionals or you have a school and that's your main income, then yeah, if your win-loss record is you're going to be very protective of it in a different way, for sure, for sure. Yeah, so have you ever seen the UWW rules?
UWW rules, no.
So UWW is United World Wrestling. They are the governing body for Olympic wrestling. Okay. So they've got freestyle, they've got Greco, but they also have what they call grappling, which is weird. To me, grappling is always the biggest circle, and then like jiu-jitsu and wrestling and all that were smaller. But they view wrestling as the biggest circle and grappling as a subset. Grappling is submission wrestling. So they have a submission wrestling rule set, both gi and no gi. And it's very, very similar to the IBJJF, but with a couple of tweaks that I actually really like. One of which is that you can score points for technical turnovers. So if I'm in, say, bottom mount and I roll you, and now, or so, no, say I'm in bottom half guard and I roll you, and now I'm in, or not half guard, apologies. Let's say I'm in bottom side control.
Right.
And I bridge and I roll, and now I'm in top side control. IBJJF doesn't score that because it doesn't come from a guard, right?
Which to me makes zero sense. It's
UWW will score that.
It's actually
right?
way tougher to do that.
100%. And it's a bigger swing in the fight. If anything, we should reward it more, right? And that would actually have really interesting ramifications, because if you rewarded that more, then do we get players that are enticing people to pass their guard?
I would.
But then you're playing a dangerous game, and we're going to get some cool matches to watch, and that could be fun, right?
Right.
The other thing that I really like that they do is their takedowns score half on impact and half on cover. So if I foot sweep you and your butt hits the ground but you bounce right back up, I get 1 point. If I foot sweep you and I pin you and I keep you on your back, after 3 seconds, I'll get another point. So now I can still earn the 2 points that I would get in like an IBJJF thing. But if I'm just spamming foot sweeps and throwing you on the ground repeatedly, I'm racking up points compared to like an IBJJF thing where maybe I'm getting advantages and your 1 point is going to beat that. So it's like, it's an interesting rule set to me, and I would love to see it take up, more of the conversation. But the way that certainly in Canada, it's like, the IBJJF is kind of like it's hard. Like UWW just doesn't have a presence here. Some of the other ones, there's another one, the Jiu-Jitsu International Federation or something like that. They have a world championship, which is again a bit more of a proper world championship where you need to win your nationals and then it gets an invitation to go to the world championship. Right. IBJJF world championships, the adult black belt division, you can enter if you have enough points that you've picked up in other tournaments, but it's not a true world championship in the sense that you don't have to win your nationals in order to go, right? And then Masters Worlds and all that kind of stuff isn't open. Like anybody can go to that. Right. And that's not to take away from people who win it. It's a huge accomplishment, and it's a huge challenge to do. And these are world class athletes, and it's arguably the biggest tournament. So it's a world championship in that sense. But it doesn't follow the rules that we've established for a world championship in other sports. We just call it a world championship. It's a bit like baseball in that regard.
World Series.
World Series, 2 countries. Yeah, exactly.
Oh man. So out of all the existing grappling promotions and stuff out there, right? Is there what's your favorite to watch right now then?
Again, if combat wrestling had a bigger scene, I think combat wrestling would be the most viewer friendly experience.
But why hasn't that?
It doesn't pick up. I think it's got a PR problem on account of the name to a certain extent. It's also it's just not that well known, and I think the way to grow it would be with fun challenge matches like that, where you take a jiu-jitsu primary athlete versus a wrestling primary athlete, and you say, hey, look at this cool rule set we have where they both have a chance to win, and it's interesting.
And we don't call it wrestling.
Yeah, and don't call it combat. Just come up with a new name. I think that would be a really good way to grow it. I like Quintet a lot. I think Quintet's super fun. Craig Jones pointed out that he's like, they found a way to make stalling entertaining, because if you're
really the small guy to eliminate the big guy.
Yeah, or the better grappler to get eliminated by the worst grappler, right? Where it's like, if you're in there with Gordon, if you can just not get submitted, if you can stall enough to not get submitted, he gets eliminated. They found a way to make stalling entertaining. That's cool.
Because stalling will happen no matter what. Might as well make it exciting.
Stalling is a problem. I think with stalling, I think the best thing is you just have to empower the referees to punish it. You know what I mean? You can't.
And then that runs into another issue, right? Like the UFC Fight Pass Invitational, the last one, where they did the hybrid ADCC rules. I don't know if you watched that one.
See them.
Yeah. So they did hybrid ADCC rules, but except they so for the first half of the match, no points, right? Like ADCC, but the referee can call negative points for stalling, right? So what ended up happening was, that was such bullshit.
I don't know. I admire the spirit of being like, hey, we're going to try to fix this problem. I don't think that's how I would go about it, but
so it ended up the match because one of the marquee matchup was Nicolas Miragali versus Felipe Pena.
Oh, okay.
Right. So Pena got -6 points, during the no points period. And then that forced him to mentally just quit, and then he's so frustrated. He's like, oh, what the fuck? And then he got his back taken, and he got choked out, right? All because of those negative points calls. So,
well, I mean, but that's interesting. If you're like, hey, the problem ended up with this negative points, but it did drive it to a point where he ended up getting submitted as a result. Then that's probably an appropriate outcome. Boring in a lot of ways, but freestyle wrestling, like the shot clock in freestyle wrestling is really interesting to me, right? If they decide you're stalling, they'll put you on a shot clock, and you have 1 minute to score a point, or your opponent gets a point, right?
And speaking of that shot clock thing, right? Have you heard of AIGA, the AIGA Championships?
I've heard of it. I'm not super familiar with it. But.
So that is actually currently my favorite rule set to watch, right? So so they do team format, right?
Right.
So it's each team has 5. What is it, 5 or 7 people?
Is it weight classes or collective weight?
Weight classes, right? So it's not quintet. So you're only 5 people in your weight class. So it's kind of like a wrestling meet, right? Okay. So you have 7 people, I think. 7 people per side in various weight classes, right? Then each weight class goes and fight, and whoever gets best 4 out of 7 wins, right?
Okay.
But each
that's fun.
Yeah, and each match is 3 rounds.
Oh, interesting.
Each match is 3 rounds, right?
Regardless of outcome.
Yeah. So every round. I mean, if you submit them in the first round, it's over.
That's it.
Right?
Oh, okay.
It's over, right? So submission
I
is
thought,
like
I thought each one was best of 3.
Yeah. So each round. I mean, submission is like an instant win, right?
Okay.
Other than that,
But you get a break in it.
yeah. So the cool thing is, again, if you get a good position and you score and you kind of stall and win that round, you only get to do it, and then you get to reset the next round, right?
Yeah, that's interesting.
Yeah.
I'm all for anything that's like, let's throw it at the wall. Let's see what sticks. Let's see what the
So check it
outcomes
out.
are.
It's actually really fun to watch.
Because the reality is we don't know.
And they
like,
have that stalling clock too, right? So,
they do?
basically,
Okay.
So basically, it's like if the referee calls you for stalling, you have 15 seconds to do something to negate it, right? So if within 15 seconds they still consider you stalling, then you get it. Then you get penalized.
Yeah, I'm fine. Like, I think that's it. I think, again, we don't know what's going to work or not work. We just got to try things. One thing that doesn't work, that again, I think the data's in on this, is like really strict definitions of what stalling is. We'll say like, you can't do this because it's stalling, and then they'll do the thing right adjacent to it. Do you know what I mean? I think you need to empower the referees to be able to identify stalling on their own and trust them that they're going to get it right. You know, and maybe you have paradigms instead of definitions. We say we know that this is stalling, so if it looks enough like this, we're going to call you for it. But it's not a hard line on it. The problem with IBJJF is like a lot of people are like, oh, but then the Brazilians are just going to win everything because the refs are blah, blah, blah. And it's like, okay, well, if you have an organization where you can't trust your refs, then then the conversation is
over,
pointless, right? They're like, what are we doing here? Like, you can't do that. But yeah, I'm all for like AIGA or whatever. Like, try new things, because the reality is we have these unintended consequences. Again, you end up with that. Have you heard of the Cobra paradox? No. Again, this is citation needed again. The version that I heard is that when the British were in India, they didn't like that there was all these cobras everywhere, so they offered a bounty on cobras, and they said if you kill a cobra, bring it to us, we'll give you $10 or whatever it is.
Okay, I can hear where I can
So-
imagine where this goes.
But then a bunch of guys were like, I'm gonna start farming cobras, right? So then they started farming cobras, and they had all these cobras, and they would bring them, and they'd make all this money. And then eventually the British caught wind of it and said, we're not paying anybody anymore. We're not doing it. And so all the cobra farmers let them go, and now there's more cobras than you started with, right? So it's become this thing where it's the cobra paradox is this idea that your intervention will frequently make the problem worse, right? And to me, again, submission only is a really good example of that. It, like we decided people were playing for the points too much. It wasn't combative enough. So we got rid of the points, and the problem got worse to the point where we put striking back in. It's like, well, yeah, now we got cobras all over the place, right? Again, I have no idea if that's a true story or not, but I like it as a metaphor. I think it certainly articulates the point really well. But yeah, like when you're making rule sets, you don't know. Like and I think you need to have. Again, you need to know why we're here. Are we trying to is this for us? Is it for the competitors? Is it for the viewers? Is it trying to walk a line between the two? And what does that look like? What are the things that are important to us? And then have a willingness to change those rules to try to stay true to that vision more than true to the rules, if that sort of makes sense. But as a result, it's it's hard to do. Game design is just difficult. Like whether it's tabletop game design or sport design or whatever, it's just hard to know like what's going to drive player behavior in certain directions. But I don't like a lot of the directions that we're in. I just dislike. My biggest gripe is just that everybody bitches about the IBJJF, but everybody still acts like they're the only game in town when they're not. Like how many rule sets do we just list? 10? We just went off on like, oh yeah, there's UWW, there's Jiu-Jitsu International Federation, there's AIGA, there's Quintet, there's ADCC, there's all these other things. But when it comes to brass tacks, the one that everybody assumes is like, yeah, but these are the real rules, are the IBJJF, right?
Yeah. For spectator, I think for spectator perspective, right? I think another issue that used to that needed to be solved before was the platform of where they compete on, right?
Yeah.
Because every time I see the elevated platform, I'm immediately like, oh, there's gonna be a bunch of resets. There's gonna be a bunch of this and that, and it's gonna disrupt the flow of the match, right? And that's what happened. I'm like, what the fuck? Why would you put people on a fucking elevated surface to do wrestling?
I'm again, whatever. Say what you want about me, but like, I believe in competitor safety. So again, when I see some of these ADCC qualifiers and it's
Going
like,
out of bounds.
oh, they're through a table, they're in the stands, they've rolled out into the street and it's still going. I'm like, just stop the fucking match. Let's get them back on the mat. It's all fun and games. It's like, oh, it's the hardest, it's the most hardcore. Until somebody cracks a skull that like people really wanted to watch wrestle, and then it's like, well, this guy's got to give it up, and all for keeping up this weird appearance of being like the most hardcore. It's just like keep people on the fucking mat.
Yeah. So the reason why I said that used to be a problem is because I think Karate Combat solved it.
Okay.
Yeah. Did you see their pit submission series?
Pit submission series. I did not see a pit.
Yeah.
No.
Have you heard about Karate Combat?
I've seen that's Boss Rutan's thing.
Yeah.
Yeah. I've seen him pushing it a little bit.
It's in a pit, right?
Okay.
Yeah. I don't know if you've ever seen it, but basically it's like they have like slanted surface on the all around it. Right?
Okay.
It's
So this is interesting.
So it angles down into a pit.
There was
right?
there was a kickboxing thing that was like this before. So when I used to work downtown, teaching and infighting, and one of the trainers there, a good friend of mine, Tom Taylor, he had a couple of celebrity clients, people that were on that Arrow TV show, the Green Arrow show.
Right.
And when the UFC came to town, they wanted to do a thing where they had some UFC fighters and some of the people from the Arrow cast, like doing some martial arts together. So Wonder Boy and what was the guy's name? Canadian guy, recently passed actually.
Oh, really?
Theodoro. Elias Theodoro?
Oh, right? Man, yeah, that guy, yeah.
He was very nice. I was very sad to hear he died. I believe he died. I hope. Really hope. Okay, make sure I'm like saying this on the podcast.
Cancer.
People on the people on.
Yeah, rest in peace. Yeah.
Yeah. Anyway, Wonder Boy came and Elias came and they were just shooting the shit. And Wonder Boy was talking about he blew his knee out in some kickboxing thing because it was a curved thing like that, and somebody did something and he kind of sprawled and his foot caught and it jacked his knee. Okay. So I'm kind of surprised that they would not that's the be all and end all, but the curved surface is interesting.
Yeah, so basically they already did it, right? So they call it the Pit Submission series.
Okay.
So they just did their first one like last week or something. So they had 3 matches, 3 of the new wave guys. New wave guys. They got Big Dan on there, right? Big Dan, and then they had Luke Griffith.
Okay.
On there versus Wagner Hosha.
Okay, cool.
On there, right? And then they had the young phenom Helena Krivar on there.
Oh, okay.
Right. So they did that.
Cool. I'll check it out.
Yeah. So it was pretty cool because there's no out of bounds. There's no nothing.
No, I mean, like, again,
there
I
were
went
no interruption of the action whatsoever. Right. It just kept on going.
Yeah. I went down to Portland years ago to watch Submission Underground, and that was Chael Sonnen's thing.
Right.
And they would have
in a cage, right?
In a cage. They would have an MMA event on the Saturday, and they would leave the cage up, and they would do a grappling event on the Sunday, and it was in the cage, and it was cool. They did a bunch of silly stuff. They had tag team matches and all this kind of nonsense or whatever. But I think it was number 3 that I was at. But that card, in retrospect, was insane. Like it was like Jeff Glover and Chad Mendez were on it. Gordon was on it. There were so many big names that were on this one little card that like I didn't realize at the time like who a lot of these people were. Like Gary Tonin got flying triangled by Shoeface. There's a guy that fought in the UFC and his nickname was Shoeface. I can't remember. He was a Brazilian dude. I can't remember what his name was, but it was the worst name. I don't know why. But like the card was stacked. It was really cool.
Dude, that reminds me of the Guardians of the Galaxy. The one Taserface. Her name is Taserface.
Exactly.
Same thing.
And then Micah Brakefield, who was in Vancouver at the time, he fought on that card, and he did a fucking flying triangle running off the cage. It was very like Matrix X. It was very cool. But that was a really good setup because I got balcony seats, and you're looking. It was a tiny little club, and you're looking down on the cage, and it was amazing view. And same thing, no stoppages. That was a funny match actually because it was EBI-ish rules, so it was a normal time, and then talk about rules that went amok, right? EBI rules are also terrible. But it was then the overtime thing, right? So Jeff Glover and Chad Mendez had this match, and it went to overtime, and then they flipped the coin or whatever, and Glover starts on the back, and maybe took him a minute or something to get a rear naked choke, and then he jumps up and he's running around. He gets up on the cage and he's got his hands up and he's just like losing his mind. And the referee's like, come back down. And he's like, what? And he's like, he gets a turn, and Glover had no idea that's how the rules worked, and then Mendez just like choked him out immediately, and like Glover lost the match. It was hilarious. The post-fight interview was really quite funny, but it was a great event. I 100% would have went to more, but I don't think he's doing them anymore.
Oh yeah, how come? Yeah, I wonder.
I don't know. But that said, again, I know I've just sat here going like, oh, these rules are terrible. I would 100% go again. It was one of these things where it was almost entertaining in spite of itself, where like the people involved in it made it entertaining. But like, also EBI rules were new enough at that time that it was like...
People weren't trying to game it as much.
People weren't just trying to like, well, I've drilled faster back escapes, for 12 hours a day for the last 3 months. So my whole thing is just like stall, get to the back escapes, and then I'll just win on fastest escape or whatever. I'm like, I can't imagine that that's what they had in mind when they made this thing.
Yeah, because I said it before. Because the first couple EBIs were exciting because you don't get any money unless you submit the person within regulation.
Yeah,
right?
yeah, 100%.
So as soon as they've done away with that, then we start seeing all the stalling and stuff.
Yeah,
but I think the issue is if you maintain that rule, then you won't draw any big names, right? Because who's gonna come sign up for a tournament that they can't guarantee to get, at least make some money out of it, right? So.
Yeah, that's it, right? I mean, you got to at least pay their way and all this kind of stuff, right? And I think my understanding is a lot of the time they don't. I mean, again, to go way back to like Metamoris and all the controversy around getting those guys paid and all that kind of stuff. They don't even get paid. Yeah, exactly. They were promised so much money and they didn't get paid and all this stuff. I don't pretend to have answers. I'm not saying that like.
So hypothetically, then, how would you structure a rule set that you feel is different than what's available out there, but it could work? Because I already know you're going to base it on combat wrestling, but
well, I mean,
what would you change?
Not even necessarily. Like again, like if it's a grappling rule set, then if we're talking about like broader strokes, then combat wrestling is to me is very close. I think it works really well. If you want to keep it closer to the IBJJF, if you want to keep it more a gi style, I think again having the two biggest things. One, I think that a standing opponent should always have the right to motion you back to your feet. I think that's the biggest determining factor for me between producing like well-rounded grapplers and not. And I understand that like standing wrestling is dangerous. The truth is falling body weight is the most dangerous thing in all sports, and especially in grappling. And again, I said this as somebody who's had, multiple catastrophic knee injuries, all from standing wrestling. I understand it's not for everybody, but when we're talking about like trying to create the most competitive, most viewer friendly, most kind of true to the spirit of martial arts, I think that anytime I can distance myself from you and say you have to get up, then you should have to get up. Rules that say, no, you have to engage this person are silly to me. I think it'll make your guard better because you will learn how to pull guard in a way that entangles me and hold me down and not give me the option to break and come out. And it'll make your stand-up better. The common argument against this where people say like, oh, no, but nobody in jiu-jitsu can wrestle. I don't want to watch a bunch of stand-up from people that don't know how to wrestle. It's like, man, a couple of years ago, nobody knew leg locks. That's all it is now. People will learn very fast, and they are learning fast. Wrestling again is on the upswing.
Yeah, it's the newest thing now, man.
Yeah,
everybody's just doing it.
And again, like you can still have tournaments that allow you to pull guard. You can still have tournaments that are in the old style. That's totally fine.
Because personal experience, right? I started jiu-jitsu since 2008, right? Okay. And I never ever fucking wrestled.
Right.
But now I'm excited to learn more about wrestling.
Yeah.
Just because it's the cool
people.
It's a cool
fun,
thing to
man.
do now,
Yeah, and again, like, but it also like if you're willing to stand, it makes you realize how much of your grappling is optional. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? There's a lot of positions like that are just optional guards, and again, a lot of this goes back to the work of the coaches that I mentioned earlier. But Riley really drilled this into me was the idea that like there's mandatory guards. There's positions that my opponent can choose. Like I can be held down in full guard. I can be held down in half guard. No one can force you to play butterfly. Right. No one can force you to play De La Hiva. These are optional guards. You could be a very good grappler and never engage in those things, right? And especially if you're willing and able to stand up, then you can opt out of huge amounts of what we take to be really sacrosanct for for grappling, you can just be like, I don't want to be here. Fuck this. I'm getting up. And it makes your training partners better, because then they realize they have to pin people. Like we're doing a unit right now on effective pinning in my school, and how that relates to guard passing, and that really all of my guard passes have to also be pins, right? If I'm not actively pinning you while I'm passing, I am relying on your goodwill to stay there while I try to do my guard pass. And that's nonsense, right? I need to be like making sure that as I'm passing, you don't have the option to just say, I'm going to get up and get out of here, right? So that on its own, just being able to motion people back up, I think would be a huge thing. And I really like tech falls. I really think tech falls are better, right? Because let's face it, seeing match, if a match gets to fucking 20-0, we know where it's going for the most part. It's very rare that we're going to get these like last minute comebacks on that. I think most people would rather see a tech fall, and I think the quality of the matches gets better when people know that there is a tech fall, because they are gonna fight out of it harder, and they'll probably get submitted more.
Just in case if people don't know what a tech fall is, what can you explain?
It's like a mercy rule, right? So it's like, you know, if you get a 10-point lead, the match is over, right? So if it's 10-0, the match is over, or if it's 12-2, the match is over, or whatever, right?
I mean, they have that in a lot of sports.
In a lot of sports, right? It's a reasonable thing to do. Sambo has it. Combat wrestling has it. It can be very frustrating. Don't get me wrong. Like, you know, when especially when those points come from a pin, right? It can be not super viewer friendly. So like in Sambo, for example, let's say it's an 8-point tech fall now. It used to be 12. They changed it to 8. Let's say I do a drop shoulder throw. It's worth 4 points, and then I get you in a pin, and I hold you in the pin for 20 seconds. I get another 4 points. I've got my 8-point lead. That's the match, right? To a lot of people looking at that, they're going to be like, that was the match? I don't want to watch that. And I understand that that's not super viewer friendly for people as well. I would have preferred they kept it at 12, to be honest, as opposed to 10. But at the same time, like, again, I said, you know, my smell test is if we pull somebody in off the street and say, are they fighting? Or what are they doing? Are they fighting, right? If you think back to like when you were in high school and you saw a fight break out, if somebody threw somebody and pinned them for 20 seconds, like the fight's over, you know what I mean? Like people are gonna be like, all right, we're done here. Like that's enough of that, you know what I mean? And that's kind of just what it's like. It's not competitive at that point.
That's always the funny part, right? Like if they're just like swinging and hitting each other when they're standing down, nobody breaks it up.
Nobody
cares and hits the ground, and then people are like, oh, well, that's enough.
We're done here for sure. Sambo also has a rule that they call total victory, which is like an instantaneous tech ball. So
I like that total victory.
Yeah, it's the most ridiculous name for sure. But it's basically an 8-point throw. They don't call it an 8-point throw, but it is essentially an 8-point throw. And it's just basically if I throw you flat to your back and remain on my feet, like nothing other than my feet touches the ground when I do it, then it's a walk-off win. It's like ippon in judo, right? So if you look at it as an 8-point throw, it's like, well, then you're just hitting that tech fall margin in one move, right? And again, like that's kind of based in reality in the sense that like if I threw you on your back and I'm standing over you, and if this is a fight, I'm going to stomp you to death. You know what I mean? So we're kind of done here. Like the fight's generally over, right? Now, if I go to the ground with you, then I have to try to pin you. I have to try to do other things to try to win the fight. But again, like I really like Sambo. I find it really fun to compete in, and I find it fun to watch because I'm highly invested in it. But I recognize that it's a very flawed rule set as well in its own ways, and like not everybody's going to want to watch it. It's not as bad as ADCC to me, but
that's good. It's refreshing to hear somebody who says ADCC it's got shit rule sets.
Well, I don't know. One of my favorite kind of little anecdote about it is I have one student who loves it. He's always like, "Oh man, ADCC is the best. It's the best rules. It's the best rules." I was like, I really kind of find it boring. Like the matches are so long, and he's like, "Oh, I only watch highlighets." And I'm like, "What are you fucking talking about?"
That means you don't even like
exactly. You know the rules are bad. You only watch the highlights because it's boring, man. It's like soccer. If you, I didn't grow up with soccer. This is what's actually gonna get me in trouble. Soccer highlights are amazing. It makes it look like this game is going to be amazing, and then you watch it and you're like, oh, okay, 90-minute 0-0 tie. That's incredible. Like that's the most exciting game in the world.
I've never ever in my life sat through an entire soccer game.
It's
never.
I don't know. My wife and I are watching the Captains of Nations or something like that. It's about the last World Cup or whatever. Yeah. And yeah, man, you watch that and you swear this would be the greatest game in the world. Like and admittedly it is probably in terms of, but again, it's a bit like ADCC. It is because we say it is. It is because of the investment. It is because of like, we all agree that like the World Cup is the most important thing. So it has all this meaning to it. But like the actual game, not a huge fan.
Yeah, for sure.
But I didn't grow up with it.
For sure. Yeah, well, totally. So, yeah, I'm going to start wrapping this up. You know, I think that was an awesome conversation. There.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Yeah,
Thanks
so I mean, obviously, we're not here to offer a solution or whatever, but
no,
I
just
think
tear things down, put nothing in their place.
No, but I think what you said about adding the rule of if the standing opponent motions you to stand back up,
Yeah.
then you have to.
MMA has that, right?
yeah.
Like it's and
I
it's
think
better
that-
for it.
I actually think that makes sense. You know what? All the major grappling promoters out there, I know you listen to this podcast, so you should definitely try to experiment with that rule and see if that makes a difference. You know.
Again, MMA has it and it's better, and we do see it. We see, like, there was somebody that got memed recently because they were trying to butt scoot, and the person was just like, "No, you have to get up." And like, yeah, you have to get up. Like, it's a fight. My joke about it all the time is that, like, when Gandhi wanted to demonstrate that he was not violent and he was committed to nonviolence, he sat down. Right? It's like sitting on your butt is not a combative stance. It's
a submissive type of stance.
Well, it's a pacifistic stance anyway.
Submissive.
Maybe. Your words, not mine.
All right. Yeah. So before we wrap it up, and if people, is there anything you would like to plug?
No, I got nothing going on right now. I'm not. Stefan and I have talked about doing some videos for a while now, but I gotta get off my ass and hunt him down for it. But I would like to plug the Way of BJJ app and make sure people get that.
Thank you.
I do actually think it'll be a really good resource. And now you can see me on there, for better or worse.
Nice. Yeah. So if people want to find you and follow you on social media, what would be the best place to do that?
Mattcraft Combat Sports on Instagram, mattcraft.ca. The name, so like Mattcraft for me is the idea of again, a lot of what we've been talking about, like a holistic approach to grappling. Like with boxing and stuff, if you say a boxer has really good ring craft, it refers to like a deeper understanding of things, right? They might be a good puncher, but they understand, where the judges sit in relation to them and how they can get away with things, how to cut the corner off, how to, use the ring to their advantage, like the whole thing. So when I was trying to come up with a name for my school, I settled on Mattcraft because I wanted it to be a multidisciplinary thing that was a bit of a deeper understanding of the totality of grappling. And my logo is 3 rings. It's a circle for wrestling and Sambo, and then a square for jiu-jitsu, and an octagon overlaid, so it looks kind of like a sun. But it's these 3 rings to represent kind of the varying shapes of grappling or whatever. What I didn't realize is that everybody was just going to assume that my name was Matthew Kraft. So that's basically all I get all day. It's like messages on Instagram like, "Oh, we are a manufacturer of high quality athletic goods, Matthew Kraft. Would you like to purchase some?"
Oh man. And so I guess we got to spell it out for them then. People
Yeah,
will be like
single T.
People will be like M-A-T-T.
Yeah. Single T, M-A-T-C-R-A-F-T.
Right. Awesome, man. Thank you so much again.
Yeah.
And just like that,
Thanks for having me on.
we'll see you guys next time.
Amazing.